Today's fun topic that we're going to talk about is difficult clients. And certainly we've all had them, right? I know I've had a few, not too many though, which is surprising and, kind of a happy thing. So I'll start by introducing myself and then let Heidi and Kylie introduce themselves. I've been an evaluator for over 36 years, and I've had my consulting business since Susan Wolf and Associates, which is really kind of just me and now and then some subcontractors as work permits. But I've been doing this since 2009 independently. And Heidi?
Hi, yes, I'm Heidi Bear too, and I have a public health background. I worked in public health research evaluation. I worked with nonprofits for the last 20 years or so, and I've done independent consulting for a while on the side, but last year in May 2021, I officially went full-time independent consulting. So it's been a fun and wild journey, and I'm happy to be here.
And Kylie.
Kylie Nicholas. This is my second career, so I was a project manager, managed a lot of the same kind of clients before I became an evaluator about 11 years ago. Then I was a consultant, worked for a consulting firm, and I started my own business back in June.
Right, so I have some all-star support for this. So let's get started. We've all had difficult clients. If not, then wow, I need to know your secret. But I'll start by talking about some of mine. One of the first is the messenger slayer, I like to call them. It's that person that says, I don't like what you have to say, so you must be wrong. And then they do everything they can to perhaps discredit what you said. And I had one person, and I might have mentioned this in a past call or somewhere, but had one that, she just didn't like what I had to say because she wanted me to do an infographic for them saying how wonderful their program was with, and how important it was, but there was no literature to support. I did an extensive literature support and there was little research on the topic at all. And then when I looked, there was very mixed evidence, most of it showing maybe not the linkages that she was trying to make. So it was like, no, I really can't do this infographic as you want it because there's no evidence, and I'm not going to put an infographic out with, made up facts. So, she kind of got grumpy with me over that. And so that's your, what you need to do when you get somebody who's trying to slay the messenger. If you know this person's going to perhaps be difficult like that, or you're going to have to deliver bad news to someone who you think may not want to hear it. Alternative facts, Julie says, that's it. If you find an alternative facts person, you need to make sure that you've thought through completely where the data came from, how you analyzed it, everything, so that no matter how they try to shoot you, you've got little shields you can put up. So it's kind of just a matter of, being a gifted swords person, more or less. You might even want to take up fencing to prep for these kind of folks, but they really can be challenging because, like I say, they will try to discredit you and may try to discredit you across a large public audience or something. And the point is to remain as calm as you can while you tell them, I'm sorry. And this is how we got this information. And I stand by it that our methodologies were sound. In other words, let go of any shakiness you have, no wavering in your voice. You just have to be very clear in saying, no, my findings are my findings and they are correct and they were arrived at appropriately. Bam. But those with folks like that, it's really important not to waver in your messaging. Okay, the second difficult client I like to think of as the unchanged link. This is the client that's in a box and they're comfortable in their little box of how they're doing everything. You know, it's like, yeah, this is good. I come in, I do my job. I do it the same way I've done it for the past 10 years. And then you find out that the way they're doing it really isn't working. And, or something has come up with demands in the program that says you got to change the way you're doing this, and they don't want to. So you're telling them, you know, the grant changed this time and you have to do it this way, or this is the expectation. And they, okay, I understand. Yeah, I'm going to do it this time. And they maybe do it one time and then they go right back to the old way. They just want to stay in that comfortable little box. And it's not that they mean to be difficult typically. It's just that change is hard for them. And so persistence is probably your best bet. Gentle nudging and persistence, and letting them know that, you know, what the consequences could be if they don't make these changes. Like, the funder is requiring that you do it this way, or this isn't effective. And in the end, we're going to have to report that. And you know, you want to keep your funding coming, right? You know, so it's just a matter of, oftentimes their response and their difficulties are based in fear of change. So be gentle, be nudging, and consistently remind them that there will be consequences, and not from you, but kind of, I guess they need you to be their critical friend. And so, again, just don't let them, keep on them in a gentle and kind way. Difficult client 3. Has anybody ever had the disappearing client? Kurt did. Yes. You email, no response. You email again, no response. And then you have to hunt them down in order to finish the work, and especially to get paid. You've had how many, Kurt?
6 months. There was one that said, let's meet. 6 months later, he responded to my email. We are supposed to talk Tuesday. I will take bets on whether he shows up Tuesday at 11.
Yeah, I had one where, and this was surprisingly, one of my disappearing clients was the one that I wouldn't do the infographic for. She just kind of suddenly ghosted me. And so I found one of the collaborators and I was like, hey, Peter, can you, we really need to move this forward. We ended up doing only half of the project, but that is one reason why you want to have payment schedules where you're paid by deliverable, so that you don't do, wait till the end of the project and hope you get all the money. But if you, this way, I was able to get paid for all the work I'd done and just sort of write off that there wasn't going to be any more work here. And, fine, because it was like, I don't want to work with a disappearing client anyways, to be honest. So, there's ways that you have to handle them. Disappearing clients who paid for the whole project in advance but never showed up. Wow, Kylie, how do I find them? Cool beans, no. Then you feel so icky. I had a client that did that. They were like, well, we've gone in a different direction and we're not going to finish. And I'd be like, well, do you want me to send back a certain portion of money? And I will do that because I just feel icky taking money for work I didn't do. Or is there something else I can do for you to make up for it? And one of them, because we weren't able to do the whole scope of work, COVID got in the way. So what we did is later on when they were reapplying, I did the evaluation plan. So I did a little extra work moving forward for them, and then we called it even. So that worked out, but they weren't disappearing clients. They were ones where we had to change scope of work. But yeah, so the disappearing client, you just have to be persistent. I used to do research on homelessness. And in doing that research, one of the things we did it was a longitudinal project. So we had to track homeless people for 18 months and keep up with them, to interview them every 3 and 6 months. So one thing we did was we got the name of a couple of other contact people, like family members or somebody that we could call and say, hey, have you seen Joe? We can't find him. something like that. Like, so we'd ask for that. So you kind of wonder sometimes if you don't want to ask your clients, could I get the name of 2 people who will know where to find you if you disappear? But probably that's not appropriate. But some of those disappearing people, I've only had that happen maybe once or twice now. So not much, but it's very unnerving. So those are my difficult clients. And now I'm going to turn this over to Heidi to talk about one of hers.
Hi, yes, Susan. Karen was also asking if you have any tactics you put up to, or you use to put those little guards up as an external consultant.
Oh, you mean, let me see. Put those little, oh yeah, the little guards up. I guess as an external consultant, when you're thinking about difficult clients who may want to shoot the messenger, do you mean, Karen?
G'day. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was talking about. I'm curious how it might differ. It's been relevant as an internal embedded researcher and consultant, and I'm curious how it might differ as an external.
Okay, as an external, it's always a matter of being very clear and keeping records of how you've done everything and being able to go back to look anything up. Have very well organized records too. Like keep your files really well organized, document everything you're doing, make sure everything's really clear, like how you did it and stuff like that. So if you ever have to go back, you can lay your hands on anything to do with that project in like just a few seconds. And that's just a matter of keeping really well organized. Like I have really well organized project files and documenting and not, you know, like if I'm working on versions of a document, I keep every old version of every iteration of every document I work on. And I just have a file that says past versions. And I shove the old versions in there, but if I ever need to lay my hand on to find a comment that was made, a change, anything, I know exactly where to find that old version and, you know, look it up. So that's the kind of thing, is keeping those records so that if changes are made or something happens, you always have those records to go back on. The other thing I keep is daily. I use Notebook to keep a daily log of what's happened during this day. And I have different project files from project meetings as well, so that I can open that notebook and lay my hand on meeting notes, events. When did you do that? Oh, well, I can see here that on February 16th, my notes show that I did this and sent it to you. So I keep really clear records of what I do every day. And it's just a matter of typing into my notebook sheet for each day, my little log that says, you know, I worked on this, I worked on this, I worked on this, sent this out today, finished it, you know, but just in case, I think it helps. And it helps me to track like how much time I'm wasting and other different, I don't keep exact hours and, you know, they're not real detailed. They're just maybe a sentence or two. Sometimes I look at a day's notes and it's 3 sentences. You know, or 3 little, did this, did this, did this. But it at least helps me to track when I've worked on what. So that's my, what presentations I did, when I did that. Everything is there. Okay.
Okay, so this is, when I started my independent consulting work, I talked to a lot of other consultants, and they told me to set clear boundaries about how I wanted to develop my business, how I wanted it to look. So I thought a lot about this, and I felt really happy that I had identified my boundaries. So my very first client work was actually a subcontract project. And so I often, with those, I think of the group I'm subcontracting to as my client, as well as the client we're working with. And I was so proud of myself. I laid out all my boundaries as far as like my work hours and when you could contact me and how to set up meetings. And sure enough, every single one was busted. So late night calls, last minute everything, late night scheduling, and expecting me to answer. There was I think one of my favorites was, we decided you'll be presenting your findings at a meeting tomorrow, and I didn't know about the meeting. There was no coordination of scheduling. a role reversal. I know we agreed you'd lead the analysis, but I took the liberty of ... So it was really a grab bag of all of the things I was hoping to not experience in my very first consulting role. So that was a little nerve wracking, but I was able to actually have a conversation with this person. And I mean, to their credit, they decided they were not going to be able to respect my boundaries. And so we needed to part ways on the project, which was a little unnerving as well, but I was glad they were honest. However, the CEO of the company then reached out to me and wanted feedback on my experience with them. And I was able to give her very honest feedback. We had a great conversation and she apologized actually on behalf of her coworker. And we are still in contact and hopefully we'll work together again. But she was really concerned about that experience. And so I was just really, it was a good reminder for me to set those boundaries, hold to them as much as I can, and stand up for them when that opportunity arises. And I actually was very grateful that it turned out as well as it did. I think I really didn't expect that. And I think in the future that may not happen as well again. But it was, as we all know, I mean, sticking to boundaries is important if you want to do this job long term, if you want to have sustainability. And I've been told over and over again to try to just work with clients who will respect that. And I think there's a lot of clients that do. And actually, since then, I have never had another experience like that. So hopefully I got it all out of the way at once. That would be great. But that was a great lesson for me. And I think we probably all have examples of where this has happened in big or small ways in our projects. Yeah, the kickoff. Oh, Susan, you're answering Lena. I will say too, even when I was clear about the boundaries, there was a lot of forgetting that those boundaries had been stated. So sometimes I kind of think, as much as you write it down or as much as you talk about, you know, how you want the project to work, some clients are just not going to be able to stick to that. So that was my fun first experience.
Great. Well, I'm going to start with a couple that probably have a couple here that probably also sound familiar to some of you all. The first one that I have is the roadblock. So this is that client who has some responsibilities, but they're just not following through. And that might look like they're not connecting you to the key contacts, or you keep making data requests and they're just not getting filled, or not getting any feedback, or they're becoming they need to funnel all of the communication through them. I think sometimes this client is a lot like the disappearing client, like maybe you ask for the data requests and that's when they disappear. But I think for me, this is where the client's just really not being accountable to their responsibilities. You know, a lot of times we rely on our clients to provide us with information. And sometimes they do they can't for really valid reasons. Like they don't have permission to share client information. Worked with a client a couple of years ago that the client information was highly protected. They needed to make all of those connections. It was a very sensitive relationship, but they didn't have the capacity to actually make those emails or call people and ask them to participate. Or I've also had clients that the data exists, but they have no really good way to pull it. And so, you know, those are different strategies than the client that maybe doesn't have capacity to follow through with their responsibilities and is getting pulled in a lot of different directions, or isn't willing to come up with a solution. A lot of times, yeah, I see gatekeepers as well. A lot of times it really becomes a problem when you can't come up with a workable solution with the client, or, and you have to be really honest with them that you can't interview people if you don't have contact information, or you can't analyze data that you don't have. So a few things that I do and have learned and continue to tweak in order to hopefully get past some of these are put the client responsibilities in the scope of work. Make sure that's in the contract, not just your proposal. I saw the the comment about the proposal, you're right, people just skim by that. But if it's in the contract, at least you have something that you can go back to and say, you agreed that you were going to give us the program data in a usable format. It was going to be an Excel file or something similar. I can't take 1,000 PDFs. Or that you were responsible for doing that outreach, and if you don't do the outreach, that's not our data collection is contingent upon that. And you can use the scope then to negotiate some of your changes. So you may be looking at it and say, hey, we can do the outreach, but it's going to either cost you this much, or you're going to need to let go of some other piece that you wanted for the project. Also, just being really transparent throughout. This is where Susan's documentation comes in handy. And also, those client relationships or those internal relationships where you're just in regular communication about how delays are affecting the project or the lack of data is going to impact the project. And that includes the timeline, the budget, data quality. If you're going to have to pull in an extra team or they're going to have to analyze data, tell them everything and tell them how it's going to impact you and how it's going to impact the work that they need. Related to Heidi's, be really clear about your boundaries, know what they are and keep them. So, we need to be able to negotiate with people. We need to be flexible, but that doesn't mean that we need to have unreasonable trade-offs. It's your budget, it's your time. Don't let your client bust the budget because they can't get it together. And then at the end, sometimes you just have to give them what you can. Like I've given clients reports with giant gaping holes in them that say, here's why the data is missing. There's nothing we can do, or these findings have a whole lot of caveats. But this is all I can do. This is all I can do for you. Sometimes that means that you've got an unhappy client, and that's okay too. Being okay with the fact that not all your clients are going to be happy with your work. Then we can do the next one. Next one is the bargain hunter. Has so many of these. The clients that they bring up all the time how much they're spending on the project. It's so expensive, and usually when they say that, it's my trigger is like, hey, you're out of alignment with what is actually expensive for the work that you've asked for, or what you're paying for. They tend to like some scope creep. They keep asking for more and don't respond when you say that you're over budget. They're just like, oh no, you're not. You have plenty of money. I've had some clients that'll be like, oh, we know we had extra $5,000, and they try and spend that like 40 times. And they also, the ones that send examples of products that they can't afford. So I've had clients be like, here's my fancy infographic that I want. And I'm like, that's like that's like a $20,000 report there. We agreed on 2. And so in terms of these clients, in my experience, it's less about the actual value of the contract and more about what the client's paying relative to their budget or what they're used to, or just this is their first time ever working with an external consultant in this kind of work, and they have no idea how much it costs. But I can say it's been the whole range. I've had bargain hunters with like $10,000 projects and bargain hunters that are in the high 6 figures, where they're just both sides. But again, most of the ones that I've dealt with haven't had a lot of experience with the kind of work we're doing, and a couple have just been really cheap. But it doesn't matter if if their expectations aren't aligned with the budget, it's just going to end up with an unhappy client. The client that comes to mind for this one is one that we had 2 pieces of work that they wanted for an actual steel. Part of it was a piece of work that we really have dialed down. We know exactly how much time it takes, exactly how much it costs. And another piece that was a little bit more of a stretch for our team to be able to deliver, and also something that we were really clear when we proposed and contracted the project was going to be kind of drafty, kind of loose. But they couldn't accept that. They couldn't accept that because they were spending so much money. And it was a huge part of their budget. They had to claw from a bunch of different areas to get there. So ultimately, we had to spend a lot of time and burn a lot of time negotiating back and forth with them to get them to even be like remotely okay with that second deliverable. So a few things that I try and do in order to get some of that alignment is really working on that expectation setting. So it can be really, really tempting to send examples of your super best, fanciest work to a client, but that might not be appropriate. So sending the examples of similarly scoped work. I won't send a fancy report if I'm only going to be able to give them a numbered list. Being really transparent, and this has happened, this is really helpful throughout, but especially when you start to have some of those conflicts and get into the negotiation pieces. So the client just might not know how much time and work goes on behind the scenes. You do that fancy facilitation, they think it takes you like 4 hours, and they don't realize that there's a lot of work. So for some clients, I've just open up the books and say, look, this is exactly how much time we spend. This is exactly how much energy goes into it. This is what it takes, and this is what we can and can't cut. And sometimes showing that can just help a client understand a little bit more about what it takes to do our work, but also then using that to renegotiate some of the priorities. Another thing is really, listening for and trying to understand why they're looking for that bargain. Is there a scope change that's really going to work out best for both of you because their priorities have shifted? They're under pressure from a boss or an external audience that they really need to shift some of their focus. So thinking about ways that you can set those expectations, but then also shift and work together. I mean, I think really, like, we talk about clients, but for me, I like to think of it as a bit of a partnership. It's a business relationship, but it's a partnership because we're in it together. And so coming to those negotiations with that perspective.
Our favorite topic. I think we've all learned some the hard way that project management is a really big part of our role. Some clients are really good at project management, but I think we've seen many are not, and many more have just never really benefited from the experience of good project management. So they don't even really understand what's missing. And I really think it's the unasked for extra that we often provide our clients, but we know it's essential. And especially, I know Kylie, you said you had a project management background. I have that too as well. And so I think I'm actually just working on a project now where we're quickly realizing that the client will not have a great project management infrastructure at all. And there's going to be multiple data collection points, and it's a kind of a medium-term project. And so me and the team I'm working with, we're getting really savvy about how we're going to build our infrastructure. So I think a couple of things here to be alert for. You don't need to budget for that. You should always budget for that. We will take the notes and meeting minutes. That's fine, but you should always take your own notes and recirculate them as well, or append them to whatever notes the client sends around, just to make sure you've captured everything. And anyone who's just honest with you and says, we've never used meeting agendas or organizing themes or key points or anything like that, that's a really good sign that they can benefit from your expertise in how to do so. So I think this one's really key. And as you see here, it may exhibit mixed method traits with many of the other slides we've seen. And I think a couple keys here is just on your own, in your own business, get really solid about your project management tools. I know people use all kinds of things. There's like Asana and ClickUp and things like that. Then there's like OneNote and for note taking, and there's tons and tons of things out there. And so I think getting clear about what you like, what works well for you, what you can share with a team. And even if it's just as simple as like, here's our Word document template for how we take notes, and here's the shared drive we're going to drop them in. I think that's really key. And then being really consistent about follow-up after meetings. I've also really enjoyed using like scheduling tools. Like I use Calendly, but that's been really helpful, just especially when you're scheduling like multiple stakeholder interviews or trying to just get people to get things on your calendar. I find that has actually been much better than me trying to go back and forth with folks. And so I think there's tons of tools out there. Some of them are really overwhelming, and I think maybe not very useful, but I think if you in your own business can really solidify what works for you, then it will be easier for you to sort of share that with your client and build that right into your work. I haven't specifically called it out when I develop a budget, but I'd be curious to know if other people have. But I usually kind of pad it into like, I'll be attending 45 meetings. I'll add some project management into it that way or something, because I haven't had this experience yet, but I am a little bit concerned about number one here, whereas you don't need to budget for that. I think if people aren't familiar with project management and they're not aware of it, they just don't think it's necessary. It's like my husband, who was a graphic designer for a while, when he always laughs when people say, I can design my own logo. And I'm sure we all can, but it really like sings when someone who's trained as a designer designs your logo for you. So I think it's just these subtleties that people aren't always aware of how beneficial it is to kind of have that extra piece there. So I'd love to hear if people have good project management practices they want to share. Ideas. I've actually recently, someone told me about ClickUp, and I've been curious to start using that. I've used Asana before, but it's not quite working. So, but this one I think is a really good one, and I think it can get missed. And so I really encourage everyone to kind of build some of this in.
Okay, and this is us. So I guess at this point, I will stop sharing and we can stop recording.